Welcome. You're listening to The Midnight Narrator. This channel is dedicated to a unique experience, using chilling, atmospheric horror stories to help you relax, de-stress, and fall asleep. It's an unusual method, but for many of us, it is exactly what is needed when the world is too loud. If you find this content helpful, the best way to support this broadcast is to like the video, subscribe for more nightly tales, and leave a comment below. Every bit of engagement helps this channel find others like us. Please note, I'm actively working to reduce ad frequency in future videos. Your experience is my top priority. Thank you for tuning in. Now, let's begin.
Every kid has a favorite TV show. Mine was a weird low-budget program called Mr. Wiggles' Workshop. I loved him until the day Mr. Wiggles started watching me back. The show only aired in my small town, and now, as an adult, I know why. It wasn't a show. It was a hunting tool. When I was 7 years old, my entire world revolved around a local kids' TV show that aired every weekday at 4 p.m. It was called Mr. Wiggles' Workshop. It was one of those cheap public access shows, the kind with flimsy sets and puppets that looked like they were made from old socks. The host was Mr. Wiggles, a man in a full-body costume of a cheerful 7-foot-tall caterpillar. He was bright yellow and green, with 6 padded arms, a pair of floppy antennae, and a huge fixed painted-on smile. Even as a kid, I knew something was off about him. He moved too slowly, too deliberately, and his face, the mask part of the costume, was terrifying if you looked too long. The smile never changed, and the eyes were just big, black, unblinking glass circles. But he was friendly. He taught us how to make crafts out of macaroni and glitter, and he had a soft, gentle voice that made me feel safe. I felt like he was my special friend. The first time the line between the screen and my world began to blur, I was sitting on the floor in my living room, closer to the TV than my mom would like. Mr. Wiggles was starting a new craft. "Okay, Wiggleworms," he said in his soft voice. "Today we're going to draw our favorite animal. Go get your crayons. I think I'll use my favorite blue crayon." As he said this, he looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking right at me. I was clutching my favorite blue crayon in my hand. It was a coincidence, a lucky guess. It had to be. But a week later, it happened again. He was telling a story about one of the sock puppets, Barnaby the bear. "Barnaby was sad," Mr. Wiggles said, his glass eyes seeming to stare into my soul. "He was sad because he lost his favorite toy truck, a little red one, just like the one that Alex has." My name is Alex, and sitting on the floor next to me was my favorite toy, a little red metal fire truck. My heart started to beat faster. How could he know my name? How could he know my favorite toy? I told my mom, but she just smiled. "Oh, honey, Alex is a very common name, and lots of little boys have red fire trucks. It's just a coincidence." That day,
The show ended like it always did. Mr. Wiggles would wave one of his 6 padded hands at the camera, but his words were different. Usually he'd say, "See you tomorrow, Wiggleworms." This time he looked right at the camera, his painted smile seeming to widen, and he said, his voice a soft whisper, "See you soon, Alex." After that day, I started seeing him, not on TV, in the real world. Our house backed onto a small, dense patch of woods. I was playing on the swing set in my backyard, and I saw a flash of bright yellow and green moving between the trees at the far edge of the property. I stopped swinging, my eyes wide. It was just a glimpse, and then it was gone. My imagination, I told myself. Just my imagination running wild. A few days later, my mom took me to the park. I was on the slide, and as I reached the top, I looked out past the playground towards the woods that bordered the park. And I saw him. He was standing about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. It was the full Mr. Wiggles costume, unmistakable. It was just standing there, perfectly still, watching the playground, watching me. I scrambled down the slide and ran to my mom, crying, telling her Mr. Wiggles was in the woods. She looked, but of course there was nothing there. She told me I was watching too much TV. The real proof, the thing that convinced me I wasn't going crazy, came a week later. I had a little plastic action figure, Captain Courage, that I took everywhere. I was playing with it in the backyard and accidentally left it in the sandbox overnight. I was devastated. The next morning, I went out onto the back porch, and there it was, Captain Courage, sitting right in the center of the doormat. But he was different. Someone had taken a black permanent marker and drawn a crude, wide, smiling face on the figure's helmet, a perfect imitation of the unblinking, painted-on smile of Mr. Wiggles. I was no longer thrilled that my special friend was real. I was terrified. He wasn't just watching me. He was coming to my house. He was touching my things. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house was him coming up the stairs. Every shadow in my room was his large, lumpy form. Around midnight, I heard a sound from outside, a soft, slow, rhythmic scraping on the siding of the house right below my bedroom window. My heart was in my throat. I crept out of bed and peeked through a crack in my blinds. And there he was, the full, 7-foot-tall Mr. Wiggles costume, standing in my mom's flower bed. He was slowly dragging one of his padded green felt hands down the side of the house. Scrape, 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 as if he was petting it. Then he stopped, and his whole body tilted up, the giant masked head aiming its blank black glass eyes directly at my window, directly at me. I screamed. I screamed a raw, terrified scream that brought my parents running into my room. "He's outside! Mr. Wiggles is outside!" I shrieked, pointing at the window. My dad, a look of angry confusion on his face, ran downstairs and out the back door with a heavy flashlight. By the time he got there, the yard was empty. "There's nothing here, Alex," he yelled up at me. "It was a nightmare. Now go back to bed." But the next morning, my mom found them, Large, unidentifiable scuff marks and trampled flowers in the garden right below my window, and on the siding of the house, a long vertical smear of green and yellow felt fibers. My dad said it must have been a deer. I knew it wasn't. After that night, I refused to watch the show. The TV was my enemy. The sound of the cheerful theme song made me feel sick with fear. But just because I stopped watching the show didn't mean the show was done with me. A few weeks later, I was playing with some neighborhood kids down at the end of our cul-de-sac. There was a large concrete drainage pipe there that ran under the road, connecting to the network of storm drains that ran all under our town. We called them the Secret Tunnels and dared each other to go in, but no one ever went more than a few feet. It was dark, and it smelled weird. I was waiting for my friends when I heard it. A voice. It was muffled, and it was coming from deep inside the dark circular mouth of the pipe. It was his voice. The soft, gentle, terrible voice of Mr. Wiggles. "Alex," the voice echoed from the darkness. "Is that you, Alex? Come and play with me. I've built a new workshop down here. A special workshop just for you. We can do crafts and tell stories forever and ever." I was frozen to the spot, my entire body buzzing with a fear so intense it felt like an electric current. I could see a flash of bright yellow deep inside the tunnel, just at the edge of the darkness. He was in there. He was waiting for me. He was inviting me into his home. As I stood there, trembling, a small object came rolling out of the mouth of the tunnel and stopped right at the tips of my sneakers. It was one of the puppets from the show, Barnaby the bear. But this wasn't the clean, new-looking prop from TV. This one was filthy, covered in a dark, wet mildew. It smelled of stagnant water and decay, and one of its black button eyes was missing. This wasn't a toy. It was a trophy, a souvenir taken from another little boy who had heard his name called from the darkness and had made the mistake of accepting the invitation. I ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. I didn't stop until I burst through my own front door, screaming and crying, clutching the filthy, one-eyed bear puppet in my hand. This time, my parents didn't doubt me. Seeing the tangible, disgusting object, feeling the dampness of the sewer on it, seeing the sheer animal terror in my eyes, they finally, completely believed me. My dad called the police. 2 officers came, and I told them the whole story. The TV show, my name, the man in the woods, and the voice in the tunnel. They were skeptical, but the puppet was undeniable proof that something was going on. They took it as evidence. They searched the drainage tunnels all afternoon, but they found nothing. No workshop, no costume, nothing. The next day, one of the detectives went to the local TV station that aired Mr. Wiggles' workshop, and he found the answer, or at least part of it. The station manager told him the show wasn't a station production. It was a local access show, meaning the producer paid for the airtime himself. The man's name was Gilbert, and he had been the writer, producer, and the man inside the Mr. Wiggles costume. He was a quiet, strange, solitary man. The station had canceled the show a few years back after receiving a handful of calls from concerned parents in other small towns where the show had aired, all claiming the host was saying their children's names on TV. A week after the show was canceled, Gilbert just vanished. He and the Mr. Wiggles costume were never seen again. But the police detective did some digging, and he found a pattern. In every small rural town where Mr. Wiggles' workshop had been broadcast, a child had gone missing around that same time. The cases were all unsolved. My family moved away a month later. I never saw or heard from Mr. Wiggles again. For years, I told myself I had a lucky escape from a very clever, very sick serial predator. It was a horrifying story, but at least it was a human one. The true, deeper horror didn't reveal itself until years later, when I was an adult with access to the endless, morbid library of the internet. I looked up the old TV station, and I found an article about the history of the property. The station had been built in the 1970s on a piece of land that had been empty for 40 years. It had been empty because it was the former site of the St. Jude's Home for Unwanted Children, an orphanage that had burned to the ground in a terrible, mysterious fire in the 1930s, a fire in which dozens of children were rumored to have perished. And I finally understood. The man, Gilbert, the man in the costume, he might not have been the real monster. He might have just been the lure, the friendly face, the thing he was leading children to in the dark, forgotten places under the town, the thing that had once lived on that very land. That was the real Mr. Wiggles. My little brother Leo had an imaginary friend the summer we stayed at our grandparents' farm. He called him the other Leo. It was cute at first. Then the other Leo started teaching my brother things, horrible things. The last thing he taught him was how to disappear. The summer I was 11 and my little brother Leo was 6, our parents sent us to stay with our grandparents on their ancient, isolated farm in Nebraska. The farmhouse was a place out of time. It smelled of dust, old wood, and secrets. It was a lonely place for a 6-year-old. So when Leo told me he'd made a new friend, I wasn't surprised. I was just surprised where he'd found him. His name is the other Leo, he told me, his eyes wide and serious. He lives in the wall. He pointed to a corner of the small bedroom we shared. The wallpaper there, a faded pattern of yellowing roses, was peeling away slightly at the seam. "He's in there," he whispered. "He's shy." At first, it was just a typical imaginary friend game. I'd hear Leo whispering to the corner, telling the wall about his day. He'd leave a cookie for his friend on the floorboards before bed. My grandparents and I thought it was a sweet, harmless way for him to cope with the loneliness of the farm. But the games started to get strange. Leo began playing hide and seek with the other Leo. But he'd hide in bizarre, dangerous places. A rusty, unused grain silo, the dark, earthen cellar under the house. He'd be gone for hours, and when we'd finally find him, he'd just say, "The other Leo told me it was a good hiding spot." He also developed a new habit, tapping. He'd sit for hours in front of that corner, tapping out complex, rhythmic patterns on the wall with his small fingers. Tap, 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 tap. Then he'd press his ear flat against the peeling wallpaper, a look of intense concentration on his face, as if listening for a reply. Sometimes he'd smile, as if he'd heard exactly what he wanted to hear. The first time I felt a real, cold spike of fear was late one night. I woke up for no reason. The room was dark, but the moonlight filtering through the window cast a pale glow. Leo was not in his bed. I sat up and saw him. He was standing in the corner, his small body facing the wall, his forehead pressed against the rose-patterned wallpaper. He was whispering to it, a soft, sibilant hiss. "Leo," I whispered, "what are you doing?" He turned around slowly, his movements unnervingly fluid in the dark. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. But for a split second, just a flicker in the moonlight, I saw an expression that didn't belong on a 6-year-old's face. It was a wide, knowing, almost arrogant smirk, an adult's expression of sly victory. It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by the familiar, confused face of my little brother. "Nothing," he mumbled, and climbed back into bed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night.
Over the next few weeks, it felt like my little brother was being slowly erased and replaced by a faulty copy. The changes were small, intimate things that only I, his older sister, would notice. Leo, who had been right-handed his entire life, started eating his cereal and drawing with his left hand. When I asked him why, he just shrugged and said, "The other Leo does it this way. It's better." He had always been a picky eater, but now he had new, strange cravings. He, who used to hate the sour taste, would now sneak into the kitchen and eat pickled onions straight from the jar. He knew things he couldn't possibly know. One afternoon, he mentioned a shiny red marble that our grandfather had lost as a boy. Later that day, I overheard my grandpa on the phone with my mom, his voice shaken. He told her that he had lost a prized red marble down the well 60 years ago, a story he had never told a single soul. The house itself seemed to be in on the secret. Sometimes when the house was quiet, I would hear a faint scratching sound coming from inside the wall in our bedroom. A soft, dry scrape, 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 like a rat's claws on old wood. One night, I heard a tapping sound from the wall, a perfect echo of the rhythm Leo had been tapping out earlier that day. Whatever was in there, it was learning, it was communicating. My grandmother, a deeply religious and superstitious woman, started to notice the change in Leo too. She never said anything directly, but one day she hung a heavy, tarnished silver crucifix on the outside of our bedroom door. "You leave this here," she said, her voice stern. "And you children stay away from that corner. Some things are best left sealed away." The most terrifying moment happened on a rainy afternoon. I was looking for Leo and found him in my grandparents' bedroom, standing in front of a large, full-length antique mirror. He was talking to his reflection, but it wasn't a game. He was having a heated, whispered argument. "It's my turn," Leo hissed at the boy in the mirror. "You promised me it was my turn tomorrow." I watched, frozen in the doorway, as my brother's reflection seemed to move independently. It gave a slow, deliberate shake of its head, its expression one of cold, smug refusal. I knew then that I had to do something.
The source of all this wrongness was in that corner, behind that faded, peeling wallpaper. My grandparents had gone into town for supplies, and Leo was outside, sullenly poking at a puddle with a stick. It was my only chance. I went into our bedroom, my heart pounding. I took a small paring knife from my pocket and went to the corner. The wallpaper was old and brittle. My hands shaking, I carefully slid the tip of the knife under the peeling seam and began to pull. The paper came away with a dry, ripping sound, revealing not the plaster I expected, but dark, ancient wooden boards beneath. And they were covered in writing. Scratched into the wood over and over again were names, dozens of them, in all different styles of handwriting. They were children's names, each with a corresponding year. Thomas, 1889, Eliza, 1904, Sarah, 1923, Daniel, 1957. It was a list, a historical record of something. At the very bottom, the letters still pale and fresh, was a new name, scratched into the wood with what looked like a fingernail. Leo, this year. It wasn't a list of children who had lived in this room. It was a list of victims, a list of replacements. The thing in the wall had been doing this for generations, luring in a child, studying them, and then what? I heard the back door of the house slam shut. Leo was coming. In a panic, I tried to press the brittle piece of wallpaper back into place, but it wouldn't stick. Leo walked into the room. He saw me. He saw the disturbed wallpaper. He looked at the corner, and then he looked back at me. And the face he made was not the face of a 6-year-old boy. It was a look of cold, adult fury. His eyes narrowed, and his voice when he spoke was a low, raspy whisper that was not his own. "You shouldn't have done that," he hissed. "Now he's angry. Now we have to play the game for real." Before I could react, he turned and bolted from the room. "Leo, wait!" I screamed, running after him. I followed him down the stairs, yelling for my grandparents who had just returned. We found Leo in the main hallway, standing in front of a narrow, strange-looking door I'd barely noticed before. It was the door to an old pantry, one my grandmother had told us had been nailed and painted shut since she was a little girl. As we watched in horror, the old square-headed nails on the doorframe began to slowly, impossibly pull themselves out of the wood. They drew back, inch by inch, with a high-pitched screeching sound before falling to the floor. The door, which should have been sealed for a century, swung open with a low groan, revealing a pitch-black, musty space. "It's time for our favorite game," Leo said, in that same strange, raspy voice. He gave me one last, triumphant smirk and then ran into the darkness. "Leo!" my grandfather yelled, and we ran in after him, our eyes struggling to adjust to the dark. We were in a small, dusty pantry, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. Leo was nowhere to be seen. We searched frantically, throwing sheets off of old tables and chairs. I pulled the sheet off a tall, standing wardrobe in the corner. Its dark wooden door was slightly ajar. I pulled the wardrobe door open. huddled in the back, his small body trembling, his knees pulled up to his chest, was my brother, the real Leo. His face was streaked with tears and dust. "I'm sorry, Ella," he sobbed, throwing his arms around me. "He locked me in here. He said it was my turn to be the boy in the wall." As we were holding him, we heard a sound from outside the house, the sound of our grandparents' old farm truck starting up. We ran to the nearest window. Down in the gravel driveway, the truck was pulling away, and in the driver's seat, barely able to see over the steering wheel, was the other one, the doppelganger. It looked out the driver's side window, up at us in the house, gave us that same wide, knowing smirk, and then drove off down the long country road, disappearing into the world. We never saw it again. We told the police a stranger had broken in and stolen the truck. How could we possibly explain the truth? My brother, my real brother, was never the same. He was a quiet, haunted child, always looking over his shoulder, afraid of mirrors, afraid of the dark. When my grandfather and I went back into our bedroom and tore all the wallpaper off the wall, we found the list of names, and next to the name Leo, someone had scratched a new word, returned. But further down, below his name, a new name was already being carved into the wood, the letters fresh and white. My name, Ella.
Every kid who grew up going to the town pool knows the game Marco Polo. It's a game of trust, of listening for your friends' voices in the chaos. We played it 1,000 times, but the last time we played, a new voice answered back from the deep end. A voice that wasn't one of ours, and it was hungry. The summer I turned 10 was the summer of the Sunnyside Community Pool. It was a perfect slice of suburban Americana. A huge, crystal-clear pool smelling perpetually of chlorine and sunscreen, surrounded by scorching hot concrete and teeming with screaming, happy kids. My best friend Mark and I were there every single day. It was our kingdom. One sweltering afternoon in July, we met a new kid. His name was Sammy. He was quiet and a little awkward, and he was clearly lonely. We decided to take him under our wing. To break the ice, we suggested a game that every kid knows, the ultimate pool game, Marco Polo. We started in the chaos of the shallow end. It was a normal, fun game. I was it first, my eyes squeezed shut. "Marco," I'd yell. "Polo," they'd yell back from different directions, their voices mixed with the splashing and shouting of 50 other kids. It was perfect, noisy summer fun. After a while, we moved the game to the deep end to get away from the little kids. It was quieter there, just the three of us treading water under the watchful eye of the bored teenage lifeguard. Mark was it this time. He took a deep breath, his eyes closed, and yelled, "Marco! Polo!" I shouted back. "Polo!" Sammy echoed. And then we heard a third reply. It was faint, almost a whisper, and it seemed to come from right beside Mark. It was a wet, gurgling sound,
like someone trying to speak with a mouth full of water. It also said, "Polo." Mark opened his eyes. "Very funny, Kevin," he said, thinking I was trying to trick him. "That wasn't me," I said, a strange chill running down my spine, despite the hot sun. We looked at Sammy. He just shook his head, his eyes wide. We looked around. There was no one else in the water near us, just the deep, blue, chlorinated water and the dark square of the main drain grate at the bottom. We should have stopped, but we were 10-year-old boys, and stopping would have meant admitting we were scared. "My turn," Sammy said, eager to prove himself. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Marco!" "Polo!" Mark and I yelled back in unison, and the voice answered again, louder this time, clearer. "Polo." It was a horrible, raspy, waterlogged sound. It wasn't an echo, it was a voice, and it was coming from the bottom of the pool, right near the main drain. Sammy, blind to our terrified expressions, just kept playing. "Who was that?" he called out, treading water with his eyes shut. "It sounds like you're underwater." He was a fish on a line, and something was slowly reeling him in. The game became a horrifying charade. The third player was a master. The gurgling voice would answer from all over the deep end, always from a different spot. It was playing with him, leading him in circles. Mark and I had stopped playing. We were just treading water, watching Sammy, a growing sense of dread building in our chests. We were no longer participants. We were spectators to a hunt. "Guys, why aren't you saying anything?" asked Sammy, his voice starting to sound a little scared. He was alone in his temporary blindness, and he could tell something was wrong. "Sammy, just open your eyes. Let's stop," I said, my voice shaking. "No, I'm going to find the cheater," he insisted, his childish determination overriding his fear. He yelled it out, louder than ever, a direct challenge. "Marco!" Mark and I didn't answer. We wanted the game to end, but the silence was broken by the wet, gurgling whisper, now impossibly close, seeming to come from right behind Sammy's head. "Polo." Sammy spun around, his arms reaching out into the empty water. His hands touched nothing, but as he turned, I saw it, a patch of water in the water just below his feet, a patch of water that was darker than the rest, that seemed to twist and swirl in a way that wasn't natural. And then it pulled him under. The official story became a 1-in-a-million tragic freak accident. The city was sued. The papers said the main drain grate must have been improperly secured, that the powerful suction from the pumps had pulled the boy in. It made no scientific sense. The pumps weren't that strong, and a 300-pound grate doesn't just come loose. But it was the only story the adults could agree on. They sent cameras down the pipes. They searched for miles. They never found his body. The pool was closed permanently a week later, a concrete scar in the middle of our town. That day broke something in my childhood. Mark and I drifted apart, the shared, unspeakable memory a wall between us. I never went swimming in a pool again. I'd have nightmares for years, not of Sammy being pulled under, but of that wet, gurgling voice whispering "Polo" from the darkness. I grew up. I moved away. I tried to forget. But a memory like that, it doesn't leave you. It becomes a part of you. Last year, I had to go back to my old hometown for my father's funeral. I was an adult now, a man in my 30s. One afternoon, driven by a morbid, painful curiosity, I went back to the old Sunnyside pool. It was a ruin. The chain-link fence was rusted and falling down. The concrete was cracked, with weeds growing through it. The pool itself was empty, a huge stained concrete bowl filled with years of dead leaves, stagnant rainwater, and trash. I walked to the edge of the deep end and looked down, and there it was, the dark, circular hole of the main drain, its grate long since stolen for scrap metal. I stood there for a long time, the wind whistling through the empty lifeguard chair. I don't know why I did it. A need for closure, maybe? Or a need to prove to myself that the terror I'd felt was just a child's imagination. I took a deep breath and I yelled out into the empty, decaying space, my adult voice cracking with a child's fear. "Marco!" The sound echoed off the peeling walls of the bathhouse and then faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. I felt foolish, a grown man yelling at a hole in the ground. I was about to turn and leave forever, but then I heard it. A sound from the bottom of the empty pool, from the dark, leaf-choked mouth of the main drain. It was a faint, wet, gurgling voice, a sound that had haunted my every nightmare for 20 years. It was the third player, and it was still waiting. It was so fast. One moment Sammy was there, treading water. The next, he was just gone. He was pulled straight down, without a splash, without a struggle. There were no bubbles. There was no kicking. It was as if a trap door had opened at the bottom of the world and he had simply fallen through. For a second that stretched into an eternity, Mark and I just stared at the spot where our new friend had been, our brains unable to process what we had just seen. Then we screamed. Our screams cut through the happy, sunny afternoon like a knife. The lifeguard, a lanky teenager who had been half asleep in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright, his whistle shrieking. Chaos erupted. People started pointing and shouting. The lifeguard dove into the water, a perfect, useless dive, and swam to the spot where Sammy had vanished. He dove down once, twice, 3 times. He came up, gasping, his face pale. "I can't see him. There's nothing down there." They cleared the pool. Everyone was ordered out of the water. Parents grabbing their crying children, the joyful sounds of the summer afternoon replaced by a siren's wail as the police and paramedics arrived. The pool, once so full of life, was now a still, blue crime scene. They searched for an hour. Divers went in. They used long poles with nets on the end to drag the bottom. But the deep end was a clean, white, concrete box. There was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to go. The police questioned Mark and me. We were 2 hysterical, sobbing 10-year-olds trying to explain the unexplainable. We told them about the game. We told them about the third voice, the player at the bottom of the pool. They gave us that look that adults give children when they think you're making up stories. They thought we were in shock, that we were traumatized and confused. Then the pool manager, a fat, sweaty man with a look of pure panic on his face, said something that made everyone stop. He said, "The main drain, the grate, it's the only place he could have gone." He insisted it was impossible, that the grate was bolted down with a special wrench and weighed 300 pounds. But it was the only theory they heard. They called a maintenance worker, who arrived with a huge star-shaped wrench. He fitted onto the bolt in the center of the massive circular iron grate at the bottom of the deep end. He struggled with it for a moment, and then, with a loud, groaning metallic screech that echoed across the silent water, the bolt began to turn. He and a police officer lifted the massive grate up and set it on the pool deck. They shone their flashlights into the dark circular opening of the main drainage pipe. And tucked just inside, snagged on a rusty piece of metal, was a small, waterlogged red and white sneaker. Sammy's sneaker.